Greetings ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mangs and I welcome you guys to the official Advanced Wars 2 Balance Patch, Mangs Edition. This is actually a prize that Mr. Antonin won a while back when he attended the Advanced Wars Subscriber Challenge. Apologies for not getting this video out sooner, it should have been out like a month ago, but I'm lazy. I guess that's the only excuse I have. So, Antonin requested a video where I'd balance every single commander in Advanced Wars 2. And this is actually a very interesting request because it's something that I've been working on for quite some time. I have a dream that I'll one day be able to create an Advanced Wars 2 hack that I can actually make a physical cartridge of, because you can do that with the right tools. And actually, you know, hand that out to a couple of my friends. You know, maybe even to some of my subscribers if I get it produced one day. Because I love Advanced Wars 2, but it is not balanced for shit. It is very unbalanced, and in this video I'll be going over each of the commander. I'll be listing their changes, and I'll be telling you exactly what I would do to balance them. Now this is something that I've been working on for years. I'm not saying that the game would be 100% balanced with these changes, but it certainly would come closer than it is right now. So without further ado, we're just gonna start. We're start talking about Andy. So what changes have I made to Andy? I'm just gonna talk as if I actually had released the patch, because I have the patch notes next to me. So Andy, I've changed mostly his powers. So his hyper repair now costs 2 stars down from 3, so you can spam his hyper repair a little bit quicker. His hyper upgrade, as a result of the hyper repair being reduced, now costs 5 stars down from 6, but no longer grants a firepower or mobility boost. So I think that Andy is a fine CO, but I think that Hyper Upgrade is way too overpowered, and Hyper Repair gets overshadowed as a result. There are many cases where you think that using Hyper Repair probably would benefit you a lot, but the truth of the matter is that you should always be using Hyper Upgrade, no matter what. Even if your entire army has taken 2 hit points of damage, you should still save up for Hyper Upgrade, because it is simply that good. Like, the hit point repair is amazing, but he also gets a firepower and mobility increase, which just makes him a little bit broken in my opinion. So now he's back to just repairing hit points, but as a result he can also spam his powers a lot more. So with these changes, hopefully there should be some incentive to actually use hyper repair every now and then and save the hyper upgrade for when your army is really taking a lot of damage. Alright, moving on to Max. So I've changed Max a little bit. His firepower of all of his direct combat units, of course the non-infantry ones, now have plus 30% firepower instead of 20. But I kind of felt like, you know, even though I really think Max is weak, giving him 10% extra firepower might make him broken. In Advanced Wars 1, Max had 50% firepower, and he was a little bit too good. But I do think that the design philosophy of Advanced Wars 1 was very spot on. Advanced Wars 1 is by far the most balanced Advanced Wars game. And I think that the developers of Advanced Wars 1 really thought that since Max could not use indirects, he was really crippled, and in Advanced Wars 2 he became a little bit underpowered as a result. However, I felt like a jump from 20 to 30% firepower is pretty massive for a commander, and thus I gave him a weakness, and the weakness is that he now takes 10% more damage from indirect fire. It really suits his gimmick. I tried to stay true to the gimmick of Advanced Wars as well. I think that that's kind of important, you know, so now he's actually also weak against indirect fire. Not in the sense that he doesn't have any, but he also takes a little bit more damage from it, so it's a way to counter him essentially. Anyway, moving on to Sami. Sami's received a buttload of changes, so her infantry units now have 10% increased firepower and defense instead of the normal 30% that they have. And I think that this makes it a little bit more manageable to do a capture game against her. It's still going to be more difficult to interrupt her caps because her infantry are going to be tougher, but they won't just blow your infantry out of the water. Like, it's so difficult to fight against Sami because her infantry can just massacre your infantry and she wins the capture game 9 out of 10 times. So this will hopefully make her a little bit more balanced. Her transport copters and landers no longer gets the +1 extra movement. Only her APCs. That's her other change. She's an infantry specialist. Not a, like, you could make the claim that her transport copter should also be good, but Sami's not an air specialist. In fact, her air units are weaker. And I think that her bonuses should only apply to APCs, because she's a ground infantry specialist. So she now only gets the benefits to her APCs. I've reduced her capture rate from 50% extra to 20%. So now when she moves an infantry onto a property, the property will only go down to 8 rather than 5. This means that it's a little bit more manageable to interrupt her caps. Keep in mind her infantry have plus 10% defense now, so in that sense it also is a little bit harder to interrupt her caps, but not as impossible as it used to be. So I've also changed her victory march. It costs 6 stars down from 8, so it's a lot cheaper, but it no longer allows instant capture. Still provides the amazing firepower and mobility increase to her infantry, but no longer that hacks insta-cap that, you know, is just fucking broken. Absolutely hilariously broken. So yeah. Then we come to Nell. So with Nell, I've done very simple changes. I've simply just halved her luck values. Not her day-to-day power. Her day-to-day power is still unchanged, because I don't think Nell is broken during her day-to-day. It's just her powers that are way broken. So her Lucky Star now gives her a luck of 0 to 3 instead of 0 to 6. So what does 0 to 6 mean? It means basically that when she uses her Lucky Star, she deals between 0 and 6 extra points of damage to units. Now she deals 0 to 3 points. And the same with Lady Luck. It used to do 0 to 10, so she had basically the possibility of one-shotting everything. Now deals 0 to 5. So essentially, she can still do 5 extra hit points worth of damage when she uses her Lady Luck, which of course makes it a very deadly ability, but she can no longer take 9 hit points off a near tank with an infantry. And keep in mind that her luck-based damage is affected by defense. If you stand on a city, you essentially reduce the luck damage she deals by 3. So that is something that is worth noting. I didn't know that, but I discovered it via some theory crafting. So defense is actually very valid against Nell. You just gotta make sure you try to keep your units off roads and plains and try to use cover as much as possible when she's about to use her power, and you should be able to mitigate most of it. Then we come to Hachi. Hachi. So Barter now costs 3 stars up from 2. And the deployment cost reduction is 30% instead of 50%. So he can still get a lot of units out, but it costs him a little bit more to activate the power. And you know, he no longer gets units at half price. That was way too overpowered. But 30% still means he gets units cheaper than Colin for a single turn. His Merchant Union now, still allows him to deploy units in cities, but if he chooses to do so, he will have to pay the full 100% price for them. So it gives him the alternative of boosting, and I still have to say it still reduces the deployment cost of all units by 30%, just like Barter did, just to clarify that. But if he wants to deploy units in cities, he'll have to pay the full price for them, so the full 100% cost. So he gets the added bonus of being able to deploy units in areas where other COs can't, but he'll have to pay extra for it. And I think that was a good way to balance Hachi. Alright. Then we go down to Blue Moon, we come to Olaf, and Olaf is unchanged. I think that Olaf is completely fine. He works just as he's supposed to do in Advanced Wars 2, and I wouldn't want to change him. I honestly wouldn't know how to change him, so... Let's go to Grit. So Grit, I've reduced the firepower of his indirects down to 10% instead of 20. So he no longer is as godlike, but his artillery will still be very good. His battleships no longer gets extra range for firepower. Grit is a ground indirect specialist. The fact that he has better battleships than Drake is a little bit silly, so he no longer gets better battleships. Snipe Attack now costs 2 stars down from 3, but no longer gives extra range. So Snipe Attack essentially only increases firepower now, but it's very cheap as a result. Super Snipe now only grants 1 range. So Super Snipe used to grant 2, it now grants the same range as Snipe Attack in addition to increasing firepower. But I felt it necessary to give Grit a little bit less range, because it got pretty ridiculous when you use the superpower. Then we come to Colin. So Colin, all of his units now have minus 10% defense, instead of just 10% less firepower, so they're easier to kill, and this was one of the biggest problems with Colin. He spammed the shit out of you with units that wasn't necessarily harder to kill, and he just overrun you. Even if they were worse, they just wouldn't die. His Gold Rush now costs 3 stars, up from 2. So, you know, it's a little bit more difficult to spam his little power. And his Power of Money now costs 5 stars down from 6, so his Power of Money is a lot cheaper. And hopefully this possibly will make his Power of Money see some more use, because right now it really doesn't, and that makes me sad. Then we come down to Eagle. So, I've done a lot of changes to the Green Earth COs. So Eagle, all air units now have +1 movement. What? Overpowered, you may scream. Yeah, it will make Eagle pretty darn good, but keep in mind that air units are very easy to counter, and as a result Eagle is not a very popular CO. You know, if you play with Eagle, like, keep in mind this is a balance patch for PvP combat, player versus player. Not for war room spam or campaign farming. This is intended to make the COs balanced against other human players. Eagle is very easily shut down. A few anti-air, a missile in the right position, his air units are now worthless, and that makes it really difficult to use Eagle. So the extra mobility will be very, very much needed in order to make them, you know, get out of the range of anti-airs and missiles and the like. Lightning Drive has been reworked. Instead of boosting air units, it allows all air units to move and attack again, but at a minus 50% firepower and defense penalty. So yes, you can spam Lightning Drive at 3 stars. It will allow your units to move twice. Only your air units though, keep that in mind, not your ground units. But they will be much weaker. So essentially, Lightning Drive will mostly be useful for repositioning air units. You want to move in, attack, and then you want to use Lightning Drive to get them out of there quickly. You know, not to attack. Like, they're going to be very weak in combat. 50% reduced firepower is pretty insane. You know, that essentially means they won't be able to do shit. And if they even as much as get touched on by an anti-air unit, they will die. So it is essentially for repositioning purposes. Lightning Strike is now reworked. It costs 6 stars down from 9, which was ridiculously expensive. And it allows all air units to move and attack again without any penalties. So this is a little bit more... You can use this superpower to actually attack twice and do some damage, whereas Lightning Drive is to get away. And I think that, like, restricting his powers to air units alone makes him much more of an air specialist, because usually how you'd play Eagle before was that you start out by spamming a lot of battlecopters, and you use the battlecopters to harass until the enemy builds a lot of anti-air, and at that point your battlecopter becomes useless and you switch over to tanks and other ground units, and at that point it simply becomes a ground war where you wait for your lightning strike and hope that you can beat your opponent by allowing your ground units to move twice. And that's a really silly way to play an air specialist if you ask me. So I think that this change will give his air units more play. It will allow his bombers to be much more effective in the late game, and because you can go in, you can attack, and you can use lightning drive to get them out of there. And I think this will be will make Eagle a lot more fun to play overall. Then we come to Drake. So Drake's naval units now have 20% firepower and defense increase. It's just a 10% increase in defense. So they should now be the best naval units in the game, aside from come by. But then they will also be a lot expensive, of course. So, a lot more expensive, I mean. So, Drake is now the top-tier naval powerhouse that he should always have been, in my opinion. His battleships now get +1 range. So yes, Drake's battleships will now be the best battleships in the entire game. They will be like Brit's battleships, but also with extra defense. And I think that this is very much needed. Drake's battleships should be terrible. Terrible, I mean terrifying. What am I saying? Terrible. They are terrible right now, because in the original Advanced Wars games, the only thing about Drake's battleship is that they get 1 extra movement and 10% extra defense. Whee! Now they get +1 range, so they should be terrifying right now. His line of sight no longer gets reduced by rain. I always thought it was silly that he debuffed himself with rain, and he no longer does that. But Tsunami and Typhoon no longer drains fuel. It was just an annoying thing about his power. It wasn't really good, it was just really fucking annoying. Still deals the damage, Typhoon still causes it to rain, but no longer gets the fuel drain. Then we come to Jess. All vehicles have 20% firepower instead of 10, so she's very similar to her dual strike self. And her infantry are no longer weaker, so she should be a ground specialist like she was always meant to be. However, her air and naval units now have 20% less firepower instead of 10. In dual strike she become a little bit too overpowered, because there was nothing really wrong with her air units. You could still use battlecopters with Jess, because they were only 10% weaker. And that really... Like, a friend of mine who loves playing Jess, he always catches me off guard whenever we play dual strike with each other. He always builds battlecopters in the start, and I'm like, oh fuck, because I don't expect battlecopters. And I forget to build anti-air because I'm facing Jess, and he completely destroys me with those battlecopters because it's so unexpected. And due to that, I think that she really needs a firepower decrease on her naval and air units, because if she's going to become a better ground specialist, then it only makes sense that she becomes a worse naval and naval and air specialist, if you could say that. Alright, then we come to Combi. Combi has received a very simple change. His units are now 20% better instead of being 30% better. You know, 20% firepower and defense increase, just like he was in Advanced Wars 1. No further change needed. Sonja, also not done a lot of changes to Sonja. Instead of having bad luck, all of her units now have minus 10% firepower. Much more reliable, you know, most of the time it's going to be the same results. I didn't really feel like changing Sonja a whole lot, even though I think she is pretty good. Sensei! Now Sensei is probably the CO that I've changed the most, and I think that I'm really happy with the changes I made to Sensei, because I feel like these changes are much more faithful to his original gimmick, which is a paratrooper. So his infantry now have 10% firepower instead of 40%. It was completely ridiculous the way it used to be. Battlecopters now have 20% firepower instead of 50%. So overall, I've nerfed the firepower of his infantry and battlecopters. But stay with me. Battlecopters now have +1 movements. Yes, so his battlecopters are now faster. However, his landers and APCs no longer have +1 movement. His movement is for his battlecopters and transport copters only. He's a paratrooper. He's a copter commander. His movements should be in the air. Not like, he has bad sea units. Why should Sensei have better landers? It makes no sense. Copter Command has been reworked. It no longer spawns infantry on cities, but instead increases the movements of battle and transport copters by 1, and allows infantry units to move and capture after being loaded off a transport copter, granted they didn't get loaded into it the same turn. So this is the ultimate paratrooper gimmick. You use Copter Command, you unload infantry from transport copters, and they can go capture properties or attack immediately. Like, of course, if you move them into the transport copter the same turn you use the power, then you're not going to be able to move them. But essentially, this will allow you to really take your opponent off guard with Copter Command. You have like 3 transport copters with infantry, you use Copter Command, you go load them up, you capture bases, you know. So you really need to keep on guard for the transport copters of Sensei, which will of course be a lot faster during his power as well. Airborne Assault reworked, it does exactly the same as Copter Command, but it also gives 1 extra movement, so it increases the movement of transport copters and battlecopters by 2 to a total of +3 because of his day-to-day power, and it also increases the firepower of infantry and battlecopters up to 50%. Not by 50%, up to 50%. So they hit a lot harder. So Airborne Assault should be the ultimate paratrooper drop. Then we come to Flack. So Flack is completely reworked. He no longer has a static bad luck, good luck. Like, I remove that shit. I hate that shit, absolutely. Instead, Flack now has 20% firepower across the board, but his counterattacks are 50% weaker. I think this fits the Flack gimmick very nicely. He's very strong when he attacks, but when he gets attacked, he gets completely caught off guard, and he doesn't really know what to do. So Flack is a CO that you want to attack with, but when the enemy attacks you, your firepower will drastically decrease. So he's good on the offense and weak on the defense, pretty much. His Brute Force and Barbaric Blow now grants him +40 and +60% firepower respectively. So just a firepower increase across the board. Flack's a strong man. He likes to crush things. I didn't see any need to overcomplicate things with him. Then we come to Lash. So Lash. Lash was very overpowered before because she had no weakness, so I given her a 10% reduction in defense. I think it fits her gimmick nicely. She doesn't give a fuck about her troops' well-being. She just sends them into battle. She doesn't care if they live or die. So the 10% defense kind of reflects the fact that she doesn't care. Terrain Tactics now costs 3 stars, down from 4, and also grants her units +1 extra terrain star. So she can now use her little power, she gets an extra terrain star out of it, which also translates into 10% extra firepower, which I think is nice. Her Prime Tactics is unchanged. Adder is completely unchanged. I think he's completely fine the way he is. I wouldn't want to change him. He's the perfect commander. Same with Hawk. I didn't see any need to change Hawk. I wouldn't really know what to change, and I don't think Hawk has any big problems as it is right now. I think that his power is still very expensive, but it should be, because it's a good power. And, well, actually, you know, I take that back. It's not a good power. It's actually a very weak power. But the fact that he has 10% extra firepower day to day kind of balances that out. Then we come to Sturm. Now, Sturm, I've changed him back to his original Advanced Force 1 self, and then nerfed him a little bit more. So, all of his units now have 30% increased firepower, but 20% reduction in defense. So, he's now the aggressive, you know, go burn in hell CO that he always was. You know, he sends his guys out to die, and he doesn't give a shit about their well-being. He just wants to conquer. And I think that his Advanced Force 1 self reflected that very well. So he has a very strong firepower increase, but his defense sucks, so he's very weak on the defense. His units can no longer move freely through terrain. You know, that has to go if he ever wants to be balanced. And his Meteor Strike now deals 3 damage, down from 8, so it's like a missile, and no longer increases firepower and defense. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I would balance every single commander in Advanced Wars. Please let me know in the comment section if you like these balance changes. Do you agree or disagree with some of them? Do you think that some of them are too good, some of them are too bad? How would you like to play a hack where these changes were implemented? Do you think it would be more balanced? I would love to hear your opinions on this. And here you go, Mr. Entinen, you got your video. A little bit later than I anticipated, but here it is. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Do please consider leaving a like and a comment if you did. It really helps out the channel a lot. And as always, I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.